Federal lawmakers condemned the shooting of protesters by soldiers at the Lekki toll gate in Lagos, as young parliamentarians call on the National Assembly to hold an emergency session. I'm Terry Kumi and you're welcome to the Gavel. It's been an intense few days in the country as Nigerians are still reeling from the shock of the attack on peaceful protesters at the Lekki toll gate in Lagos. The Nigerian army has denied shooting at protesters. The End SARS protests have been ongoing for about 2 weeks in different cities across the country, with protesters calling for the scrapping of the Special Anti-Robbery Squad SARS, an end to police brutality and total reform of the police. The protests degenerated into violence in some parts of the country after hoodlums hijacked it. In the aftermath of the Lekki toll gate incident, various buildings, businesses, government institutions, public properties and media houses have been destroyed by hoodlums, causing tension across the country. Here's our first report.
On the morning of Tuesday, October 20, the Speaker of the House of Representatives addressed the House on the End SARS protest.
With many reported instances of violence between state actors and protesters, between protesters and armed thugs who seek to hijack the passion and idealism of these protests for other nefarious purposes. The federal government of Nigeria has acted to dissolve the Special Anti-Robbery Squad, SARS, whose gross abuse of power are the proximate causes of this present unrest. The government has moved to set up, through the National Human Rights Commission, a national judicial panel of inquiry, in addition to similar panels set up by the federating state governments. The House of Representatives has committed to a program of reforms. We resolved to collaborate with the Nigerian Bar Association and the National Human Rights Commission in this effort, and to ensure that draft legislation is ready for consideration within 30 days. None of these actions have sufficed to convince the ever-growing numbers of protesters to withdraw from the continued agitation. From Lagos to Awkuzu, from Port Harcourt to Kano, Abuja and Enugu, the protests have continued relentlessly with good cause. Whatever else may be driving this moment, our people expect more than commitments.
The Speaker itemized some of the actions the House of Representatives will be venturing into to address the problem of police brutality.
The House will receive and immediately begin to consider legislation that seeks to establish a system of independent, responsive accountability that, 1, holds erring members of the police force to account for their conduct in the performance of their duties. 2, imposes civil and criminal liability for violations of the law and the police regulations. Ensures that officers found who engage in unauthorized, unlawful use of force are expelled from the office and subject to the full penalty of the law. You have raised your voices and marched to demand a better Nigeria, from Abuja to Washington, to Calgary and London. Your voices have been heard. Do not allow anybody to convince you that to withdraw from the streets now is to concede defeat. This is the time to move your agitation from the chaos of the streets to the painstaking deliberations and strategic partnerships that birth policy and produce legislation. I will not sign off on a 2021 budget that does not include adequate provisions to compensate those who have suffered violence and brutality at the hands of the police in Nigeria in the last decade. I will not sign off on a budget that does not meet the reasonable demands of the ASU, to which government has already acceded. There is no better time to rethink the system of funding for higher education in Nigeria. The current system does a great disservice to our children and our country, and we must commit to changing it so that we can free our institutions of higher learning to be citadels where innovation thrives and excellence is a given.
That same Tuesday in the Senate, lawmakers asked President Muhammadu Buhari to, as a matter of urgency, address Nigerians on the End SARS protests. They also appealed to the protesters to end the demonstrations.
Just like they're doing in the states now, a judicial panel that will have people that are well respected by the same youth, so that they can address a certain issue. And that issue, Mr. President, is those SARS officers, the notorious ones that have been identified and even identified by the presidential panel, because the presidential panel has identified 35 officers that they say are most notorious in all these killings and all these things. But Mr. President, later I will also forward to you the name of the 5 most notorious of them, 5 of them across this country who have been fingered in killing so many Nigerians.
The protests have increased in intensity and violence with socio-economic activities paralyzed across Nigeria, with some compatriots allegedly losing their lives in the ensuing melee. Further worried that the protests have now grown beyond the initial agitation to #end SARS and #end police brutality, to include the demands for good governance, accountability of government, reforms of key governmental institutions like INEC, judiciary, health, power, amongst others, and accepts that as political leaders, we must take responsibility of protecting, providing succor, and guiding our youth.
What we have today right now is that the very lofty, the very genuine, the very good motivated actions of our children is being hijacked. Mr. President, my own children, like I said, my own children are in the streets of the US participating in this End SARS protest. But I can tell you, Mr. President, I am not sure that my kids are in support of those who have hijacked this protest to go release prisoners, from the prisons.
But on the evening of Tuesday, October 20th, men in military camouflage opened fire at protesters at the Lekki Toll Gates Plaza in Lagos. The Nigerian army claimed none of its men were on site at the scene. Following the Lekki Toll Gate incident, reactions from federal lawmakers began pouring in.
These youths were only demanding that government lives up to its responsibility of protecting their lives from police brutality, and for a better future for them. My heart bleeds, and like all mothers, I condemn this callous act in all its ramifications. I implore the President Muhammadu Buhari, to stop the heinous crime, investigate and ensure that the military officers responsible for the Lekki massacre are brought to book.
Well, I'm not particularly concerned about Lekki Toll Gate alone. I'm concerned with what is happening all over the country. What is happening is most unfortunate and unexpected. What started as a peaceful protest against police brutality and the excesses of the anti-robbery wing of the Nigerian police force has now degenerated into anarchy, looting, arson, and vandalism. So it's really unfortunate, as I said. When it started, many Nigerians appreciated the situation and understood the feelings of those who started the protest. All the demands have been achieved. The squad has been disbanded. Those who committed excesses will be prosecuted, and the entire police force will be reformed. But then they started the government in power must go. Attacking innocent citizens, burning, destroying, smashing their cars, now burning government properties, even those properties that are not that of the government, but they belong to people that associate with the government, are being destroyed. I think that the protest has gone too far.
The shooting of the protesters sincerely is unfortunate, and I pray that the international community will not send a strong hammer on us because of what happened. Because purely that was genocide, without missing words. As protesters were protesting peacefully, and someone will just come with guns and start shooting at them. Not that the other person has a gun, and so it wasn't a fight. It's quite an unfortunate thing. And one thing that it will give people more confidence is that tomorrow, let's see that the person and the people that perpetrated that act, that they are arrested, let them be identified, let them be arrested, let them be taken to court. That's the process. We know that the court process takes a long time. But identify those that perpetrated those acts. And in handling the protests, yes, even if the protesters does not have leaders that you can dialogue with, there were demands. Demand 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, which they were which is 5 for 5 that they had. Yes, government have said we have agreed to implement such demands, but the protesters still insisted that look, we want you to start implement. To me, it wasn't something that could have been difficult for government. For instance, the George Floyd issue in the U.S. Amidst protests, at least the people saw that the police that perpetrated the act were arrested. Not just that were arrested, were even taken to court. When they were taken to court, they were charged with second degree murder. People refused it. No, the murder was still, the charges were still so if Nigerians could have seen that even the police that were involved in extrajudicial killings are in court, have been charged to court, that could have even been one step. It's not a big deal.
People have the
The
right to
Senate
say
president
where
also
they want
briefed
to go.
journalists on the End SARS protests after a meeting with the Inspector
Express
General of
themselves
Police and the
through
Director
peaceful
General of
protest.
the Directorate of
But
State
we must
Service.
never
He was,
allow
however,
ourselves
silent on the
to
Lekki
be taken in
tollgate
the wrong
incident.
direction. And I will take this opportunity to urge all well-meaning Nigerians that this is our country and everyone must show interest in its survival and in its peace. This is a country that we have to ensure that it works for all of us. People have the right to say this is not the way they want to go once it is a legitimate way to express themselves through peaceful protest. But we must never allow ourselves to be taken in the wrong direction of violent protest like we have witnessed in some parts of the country.
The Young Parliamentarians Forum of the National Assembly also reacted to the Lekki tollgate incident and asked the leadership of the National Assembly to, as a matter of urgency, reconvene for an emergency session to discuss the attack on peaceful protesters. The lawmakers say they are dismayed by the recruitment and deployment of hoodlums and thugs to disrupt and hijack the protest by patriotic Nigerians, which has caused the death of innocent citizens, the destruction of government and private property, and the disruption of economic activities in some cities around the country. They want the federal government to ensure adequate and immediate compensation to the victims of police brutality, banditry, and terrorism. They're also asking the Nigerian army to identify the armed men in military uniform who attacked innocent protesters at the Lekki tollgate in Lagos on October 20, 2020, and for the Nigeria Police Force to identify officers who attacked peaceful protesters in cities across the states.
The National Assembly has suspended plenary for 5 weeks to allow lawmakers focus on budget defense sessions. Parliament has set a target of passing the 2021 budget by December to continue with its goal of operating a one-year budget cycle. Now, before suspending plenary, the Senate passed the Petroleum Industry Bill, PIB, through the crucial second reading. The PIB is intended to create efficient governing institutions in the oil and gas sector and promote the exploration of petroleum resources for the benefit of Nigerians. Previous assemblies had unsuccessfully attempted to pass this critical legislation for nearly 15 years. And one of the key aspects of the PIB is the proposal to transform the NNPC into an incorporated commercial body to be known as the Nigerian National Petroleum Company Limited. The Petroleum Industry Bill is making another journey through the legislative process in the National Assembly. Previous assemblies have unsuccessfully attempted to pass the critical legislation for nearly 15 years. The PIB was tabled for second reading during Tuesday's plenary session in the Senate. The proposed legislation is intended to create an investment-friendly oil sector to boost the economy.
The non-passage of PIB has had inimical impact. Nigeria has lost billions of dollars in terms of revenues from the industry. No doubt, the continuous stalling and delay in the passage of the bill has hampered the realization of huge investment opportunities, denying Nigeria the unique competitive position as an oil and gas leader in sub-Saharan Africa. So the earlier we resolve how to get the maximum benefits out of oil and our oil reserves, the better. Create efficient and effective governing institutions with clear and separate roles, and to establish a framework for the creation of a commercially oriented and profit-driven national oil petroleum industry. To promote the exploration and exploitation of petroleum resources in Nigeria for the benefit of Nigerian people and in the efficient, effective, and sustainable development of the petroleum industry.
One of the key aspects of the PIB is a proposal to transform the NNPC into an incorporated commercial body to be known as the Nigerian National Petroleum Company Limited. Other key government agencies in the petroleum sector are also to be transformed.
Chapter 1 of the bill provides the industry governance framework. It redefines the powers and roles of the minister and provides for two independent regulators for the industry, one for upstream and the second for midstream and downstream. In addition, it makes provisions for the incorporation of NNPC Limited, which will be a profit-oriented commercial entity wholly owned by the government. It also provides for future commercial entities that may be created based on voluntary migration of joint ventures to incorporated joint ventures.
The PIB makes provision for host community development and provides for a new fiscal regime. However, some lawmakers want some adjustments made in the proposed legislation. Others want a bill which will attract foreign investment to the petroleum industry.
I know the potential argument that will arise from this. They will say, oh, we want a very competitive industry. Mr. President, we all do. Clearly, we want the Nigerian oil sector to be competitive so that those investors, those foreign investors, will rather invest here than go to Ghana, go to Chad, and other places. We agree, Mr. President. But, Mr. President, this could also be a win-win for us. We can achieve that, Mr. President, by also taking this to a level, a percentage that is acceptable to everybody, because you don't want to do something and then before you start anything, there's already serious agitation, you know, in the host communities.
This bill must also have something for Nigerians. No Nigerian company have done exploration in Nigeria. All the Nigerian companies say they are doing exploration. They are not doing exploration. They only went to buy assets owned by Shell. And those assets were overdue oil wells, which were led by major oil companies to go to deep offshore and so forth. And they bought it. And no Nigerian company have really entered into exploration. They are trying and trying and trying. We must give opportunity for Nigerian companies to be able to do exploration on their own.
We must understand that the delayed passage of PIB is for a reason. Many operators don't want us to pass the PIB because they are profiting from it. But if we show courage like we did early this year, before we did the amendment of the PSC Act, if we show courage to do what we did in the PSC Act, we are going to forestall those people. So, Mr. President, know that you have a challenge. The same way you came out the other time with your leadership, come strong on this, so that those people who are profiting from the lack of this bill will go and find other places to go. The other issue I want to talk about, this bill is very, very important, that we have to look at the headship all heads of state, that each time they have any head of state, the first thing that person does, he says he's the Minister for Petroleum Industry. Mr. President, we have to ensure that this bill will forestall such exercise, because a president cannot do the job of a minister and then remain accountable.
The NNPC is going to be unbundled, like somebody has said, and they've given some possibility of even timelines, because transitional provisions are being made so that we're not just passing the bill. We are going to see some definite actions that will be taken based on certain timelines, just like we had for the electricity power sector. So I think when we definitely follow this through, we are going to have a redefined upstream licensing regime. We are going to have transparency in the bidding process. Right now, you don't even know what the bidding process looks like. But here, we are going to have a defined, definite bidding process that is transparent.
The critical sector, one of the main critical sector of this bill, the petroleum profit tax. I want to thank Mr. President, the National Assembly, when we have to make a major amendment into the current tax system at its current, we have it in the oil and gas sector. But this one major sector of the part of the bill that we should not take lightly at all. And I want to strongly believe that the Committee on Finance will play a critical role in this particular area, as this will form one of the fundamentals upon which the bill, when eventually came back and to be passed into law, will be duly considered. Because today, the oil and gas sector are all over the place complaining about the PPT, which is an integral part of this bill that we are considering. We are here for them, and I believe it is not too late to get the Committee on Finance involved in this regard.
After the debate, the Senate gave its committees on petroleum downstream, upstream and gas a deadline of 8 weeks to make the required legislative input into the bill and return to the upper chamber. Meanwhile, the Civil Society Legislative Advocacy Center, CISLAC, is asking the National Assembly to come up with appropriate legislation to address the problems hindering the fight against corruption and development of the country. CISLAC's Executive Director, Mr. Awar Rafsanjani, made the request at a meeting with the Majority Leader of the House of Representatives.
Nigeria is facing serious crisis, and it needs, genuine intervention from both policy makers and legislative intervention to address some of these problems. Likewise, too, in terms of the corruption that has brought us to the level we are, the decay that we have, we believe that legislative intervention, with the progressive members that we have in the House of Representatives, will go a long way to deal with, the kind of impunity we see in corruption in this country. You have done a lot in terms of creating the enabling framework, because without the National Assembly making the law, there's nobody that can actually have any law to even set up these agencies.
The Majority Leader, on his part, seized the moment to address the jumbo pay of federal lawmakers.
I don't know when will you help us educate Nigerians to know clearly that what we are doing here is for the benefit and the overall interest of Nigerian people. I don't know when you will have time to help us educate Nigerians know that what we spend here in terms of our emolument or salaries compared to other arms and agencies of government is like a peanut. Take it from me on record that of over 12 to 13 trillion naira budget we have today in the 2021 budget, Nigeria's National Assembly will have less than 1%. 1% of the total budget coming to the National Assembly. Nobody knows that.
This is where we draw the curtains on this week's edition of the Gavel. If you have any views on any of the issues discussed or raised so far, please email us on thegavel@channelstv.com. Thanks for watching and see you next week. I'm Terry Ikumi. Goodbye.